to Life on Earth.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Earthlings.
Welcome, Earthlings. Oh, hitting the piano there. This is our show theme, taken from Jim Astley's recent composition. And we'll present more of that on the next show. Usually, at the beginning of Life on Earth, I would explain, why is the show called Life on Earth? We're all on Earth. We're all alive, no matter what we're doing. But
chair and glass of water.
That's right. A chair and a glass of water in honor of one of our first objectivist friends. We'll explain that one too someday. And usually I'll mention right now, back in 1976, the year of the bicentennial, Ayn Rand spoke to the graduating class of West Point, said of her philosophy, formally I call it objectivism, but informally I call it a philosophy for living on Earth. That's why the show is called Life on Earth. You've heard my spiel before, but this time I've got to read from Atlas Shrugged.
Okay, do it.
Because when you say "cuz" on a podcast, what kind of language is that?
So barbaric.
I know, but earlier today, Rucka of Ayn Rand Center UK, famously of the Daily Objectivist, and in this case on the Clubhouse afterward, mentioned a scene in Atlas Shrugged.
Okay.
That could also serve as the intro to this. Now, there's a bit of a spoiler alert, but it's a minor one. One of our characters, Dagny Taggart.
Oh, just read the book, everybody.
Is talking to the scientist, the eminent scientist, Dr. Robert Stadler. We'll quote him later in the show. And she's trying to track down who on earth could have created a bit of technology that she found. And the scientist is saying, well, you say that you found this in the research laboratory of a plain commercial motor factory? Yes. Well, that's odd. What was he doing in such a place? Designing a motor. Well, that's what I mean. A man with the genius of a great scientist who chose to be a commercial inventor. I find it outrageous. He wanted a motor, and he quietly performed a major revolution in the science of energy, just as a means to an end. And he didn't bother to publish his findings, but went right on making his motor. Why did he want to waste his mind on practical appliances? Perhaps because he liked living on this earth, she said. Okay, to know the full weight of that scene, and you really should, you've got to read Atlas Shrugged. 99.88% of our audience has already read that book, but if you haven't yet, if you are the 0.02 that hasn't read it yet, now it's your turn.
Yeah, to Dr. Stadler, I would like to have my brain living on Earth, not in a jar.
Not in a jar. That's right. We are not brains in a jar here on the Life on Earth podcast or YouTube show. I guess it's sort of we'll go back and forth on is it a podcast? Is it a video? It's razzles. It's both a candy and a chewing gum. So this week, every week, all the time, but especially this week, the topic came up. Blind rebellion or blind following. You know, there's a great meme by the eminent comic artist and cultural commentator Bosch Foston. I don't remember the exact words in it, but it's essentially a man saying out loud to those who he defies, you tell me to stand, I'll kneel. You tell me to kneel, I'll stand. And the idea is, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to rebel. I'm not going to follow orders. And Mr. Foston himself has proven that he lives by those words. He's famous for having drawn Muhammad, especially during the years, and this is still true, but especially during the years when it was dangerous to do that. We all remember the stories of Charlie Hebdo and the bombings of the offices and the murders over drawing the figure of the Prophet Muhammad. So we understand that. We understand that rebellion. We understand the mind that says, tell me to do X and I will do Y. Tell me to do Y and I will do X. I do not submit. And we, as objectivists, value the virtue of independence and first-handed thinking. And it sounds real simple, except there are so many examples in which to rebel almost requires foolishness. So a few examples. Imagine you take the present viral pandemic seriously, and imagine for a second, even if you don't, that you think seriously means observing safe practices, extra social distancing, washing your hands a lot, extra hygiene, maybe wearing masks or receiving the vaccinations that are available. Assume for a second that you believe that. I think a lot of you do. We do.
We do.
And you believe that because you think it's advisable for your own health and for the safety of the people you care about.
Yeah.
But you don't want to appear to sanction mandates. You don't want to appear to advocate self-sacrifice. And you walk into a store that requires masks, say, and you respect their property rights. You're like, oh, okay, it's their store, I'm going to wear a mask. And yet you feel that you're sanctioning these mandates. You feel that you're sanctioning irrationality. Or take another example, because this came up on the weekly objective.
Okay.
There was a discussion about veganism, so-called ethical veganism. It was fun because we had an objectivist on the show who was not an ethical vegan in the sense that he thinks you're immoral if you eat meat. He chose to be a vegan, both for health reasons and because of his love of animals. I've been there. I did that for 10 months, and I still won't eat certain animals that I think are raised in outrageous manner. But point is, suppose for a second, again, even if this isn't you, just imagine for a second that you buy organic foods, not because you're anti-GMO, you're all for genetically modified organisms, but just because you've noticed organic foods actually tend to be better food. They're made with a higher quality. And it's not surprising because it takes a lot of extra work to bring organic foods to the table. Mm-hmm. So suppose you buy organic foods just because you find they're of higher quality, but you don't want to appear to be anti-GMO. You don't want to sanction government legislation that outlaws certain GMO practices or forces manufacturers to put it contains a GMO on their packages, even if they don't choose to.
Yes.
Take one more example, and this one will be extra controversial.
Ooh, extra controversy.
Suppose you are fighting the political right because you believe that the present leadership on the right has destroyed any possibility of the kind of principled, effective, credible, ideological party that we need to fight the left. But you don't want to appear to support today's philosophically disintegrated, culturally nihilistic left.
Right. Mm-hmm.
How do you manage that?
What does one do?
What can one do? It's funny. I immediately thought of what can one do and looked it up. It turns out Ayn Rand answered the question, what can one do? I think most of us are familiar with the earlier question that she answered. What I have here, what I'm holding up to the camera before your wandering eye, is a copy of the Objectivist newsletter. This is the anthology of all of them collected.
Yes.
This was reprinted in The Virtue of Selfishness. And this is interesting too, because this actually appeared here. I'll hold it up here. This was actually appeared in the Intellectual Ammunition Department. In other words, subscribers sent in questions, and Ayn Rand or Ayn Rand and Company would answer them. So this great article that we all now know because it was reprinted in The Virtue of Selfishness started out as a question somebody asked. And the question was, how does one lead a rational life in an irrational society such as we have today? In the first paragraph of her answer, which is very long, the first paragraph says, Ayn Rand writes, I will confine my answer to a single fundamental aspect of this question. I will name only one principle, the opposite of the idea which is so prevalent today and which is responsible for the spread of evil in the world. That principle is never fail to pronounce moral judgment.
But can you pronounce moral judgment in a contextual way where, say for instance, if you're a vegan, but you're not an ethical vegan, you just do it for health reasons or however, and you want to explain that to people and say, I'm not ethical vegan, really I'm not, and I'm not immoral, that.
And can you do it without a bunch of objectivists jumping down your throat? Well, they can't literally jump down your throat because you're a vegan and they are meat, but Can you do it without taking flack from your, I'm going to put up the air quotes for folks who are only hearing the audio. Can you do it without taking flack from your own side?
Yes, your own team.
Ooh.
It's like
I have to say the Sunday conversation was very civil.
yes, it was.
Yes.
It was great. And but it also does remind me of, how liberals kind of eat their own, and objectivists sometimes eat their own too in that way. And
Yes.
so it takes a lot of patience and context and willingness to actually hear what somebody has to say and what's in their mind, what's in their head.
So a few years later, in the Ayn Rand letter, that was the Objectivist newsletter, published in the mid 60s. In the later 60s and early 70s, or I guess just in the later 60s, you had the newsletter, The Objectivist, as opposed to the Objectivist newsletter. And then the third one, final newsletter that Ayn Rand put out was called the Ayn Rand Letter. And here we have the anthology of this. You can order these from Harry Binswanger's TOF Publications, which is where I got them years and years ago. If we go to the Ayn Rand Letter of January 3rd, 1972, she published a letter called What Can One Do?
Wonderful.
This one's a little hard. I think this one might have been published in the Voice of Reason, but either way, from the original Ayn Rand letter, what can one do? So a few years later, Ayn Rand writes, this question is frequently asked by people who are concerned about the state of today's world and want to correct it. More often than not, it is asked in a form that indicates the cause of their helplessness, quote, what can one person do, unquote. And then Ayn Rand goes on, I was in the process of preparing this article when I received a letter from a reader who presents the problem and the error still more eloquently. Quote, how can an individual propagate your philosophy on a scale large enough to affect the immense changes which must be made in every walk of American life in order to create the kind of ideal country which you picture? Unquote. Ayn Rand goes on. If this is the way the question is posed, the answer is he can't. No one can change a country single-handed. So the first question to ask is,
What about double-handed?
Double-handed. Even you could get out your third hand and not do that. So the first question to ask is, why do people approach the problem this way? Suppose you were a doctor in the midst of an epidemic. You would not ask, how can one doctor treat millions of patients and restore the whole country to perfect health? You would know, whether you were alone or part of an organized medical campaign, that you have to treat as many people as you can reach, according to the best of your ability, and that nothing else is possible.
So a man's got to know his limitations.
A man's got to know it. Thank you, Clint Eastwood. Yes, a man's got to know his limitations. You should read the whole article. It's outstanding. After a lot of setting the context, one of the things she then says is, if you like condensations, provided you bear in mind their full meaning, I will say, when you ask, what can one do? The answer is speak, provided you know what you are saying. Great article, should be read. There's a lot more in there, but that speaks to our question today.
I love this. This is how Ayn Rand actually wrote her name.
Yes.
And Scott's funny. He says that we're gonna start tearing up at her nonfiction now.
Oh, there are places. I've got the fountainhead back here, and if you want me to tear up, I can tear up on command in several places, in both the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged.
Well, then, okay, but I just want to thank, shout out to the DDV show for $20 or 20 pounds, I should say.
No, it is $20.
To Ayn Rand Center UK. Thank you so much. He says, no question, just saying hello. Love the positive energy.
Wow. Thank you for that.
That's wonderful.
And
it's like it's a mirror effect. It's like this exponential circle of positive energy that's growing and growing.
It is. It's a beautiful thing. And since I've spent 15 minutes setting up the topic,
yes,
which we're not done with yet, but I will take a moment to say, if you go to AynRandCenter.co.uk, you can become a member. It's great. The super chats that you do during our show actually support ARC UK. Not us directly. We'll tell you later how you can do that. But Anything you super chat goes to the center. Very cool. If you're not already a member, though, for £10 a month, you can sign up to become a member of ARC UK. Get
Mhm.
access to all sorts of cool extras that only members get. You can get on their WhatsApp. You can get the conversations, including study groups. We just wrapped up. Which one was it? Night of Grant, January 16th,
Mhm.
from the early Ayn Rand study group. Now, the people who know better will say, well, Night of January 16th wasn't in the early Ayn Rand. We're studying the early works of Ayn Rand. So we're studying the whole book, the early Ayn Rand, but also we will study not just Night of January 16th, but The Simplest Thing in the World, which some people will
that's
say also,
beautiful.
well, that's not in that book either. That's in the Romantic Manifesto. Again, we're not studying the book so much as the topic.
Yeah.
Other study groups. You've got James Valiant leading
Ah,
Leonard Peikoff on induction. Difficult, challenging, but extremely
just
valuable topics.
love that guy,
You've
James
got-
Valiant.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you get notifications of things like the weekly objective that we just talked about on Sunday. Oh God, that was a hoot. The weekly objective
That
on
was a hoot
Sunday
and a
morning.
half for 2.5 hours.
Well, the weekly objective is normally led by business analyst Jonathan Hoenig.
Mhm.
Smart guy.
Yeah,
He wasn't available last Sunday.
right.
So the Lord and Emperor of all things, ARC UK, the man
Yes.
behind the scenes who runs everything, makes it all happen, without whom I don't think any of this stuff would
No,
exist.
I mean, the guy's brilliant.
But
Rosie Ginsburg.
Rosie Ginsburg decides to host
Mhm.
the weekly objective, chooses a controversial topic, as we mentioned earlier, the
Mhm.
question of veganism, because he believes that ethical veganism, so-called being a vegan for ethical reasons, is an immoral choice. And he justified that well during the show. But the point is, as you can imagine, controversial topic.
Yeah.
That Sunday show usually runs half an hour or so, and then maybe
Right.
some time on Clubhouse. Show ran 2.5 hours and went over and almost got in the way with us doing our usual Sunday 6 p.m. show. So that was a hoot. Become a member. Click the link.
Yes.
It's in the chat. And join up. You can sign up for anywhere from £10 a month with, all sorts of perks. But if it's in your budget, you can go up to £100 a month. You get the Reardon Medal level subscription.
Yes.
And all sorts of goodies come with that too. So you should be a member if you're not already. But let's get back to the topic at hand.
Before we do, thank you so very much, Sam, for the £5. He says, your show. Okay, this is so lovely and so wonderful.
Is it immodest for us to read this out loud? We have to read it out loud. It's a super chat. He paid for it.
Yeah. Do you want to read it? Should I? Because it's so lovely and so
you
special.
Read it. If it's lovely, you should read it.
I love it. Your show is my favorite objectivist content. I mean, that's
Aw.
whoa.
Wow.
I mean, practical advice and insightful perspective. Energy has elevated since episode 69. Keep it up. And speaking of episode 69, I just want to give a shout out to our other podcast on every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard. That's 5 minutes.
5 minutes with Robert Nacer, which is also, of course, co-hosted by Amy Nacer.
Yes,
Everything I do, Amy is the better half of it. Thank you, Sam. Oh, yes, for bringing that up, because, of course, it would be immodest of me to say, we got this great Sunday show. You should see too, but you actually should. Go to robertnacer.com. The links are there. You'll find everything you want to know. But back to the topic at hand.
Yes.
That was so cool of Sam. Yeah, what do you do if you, again, the first example I gave, you take this viral pandemic seriously and you want to do all these things to, make sure you're not afraid, not living in fear, but just doing reasonable things, some of which will show if you're in a place where you think it makes sense to wear a mask and you're wearing a mask and you're like, well, wait, I don't want people to think I should wear a mask because the government told me to. This is just what I think I should do. What do you do when your alternatives appear to be being a blind follower or being a blind rebel? A rebel without a cause.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you ever run into, because I've given my examples. Have you run into this, Amy?
Oh, yeah. So what I do for fun is I introspect, because I have all sorts of little categorizations and epistemological tricks that I can kind of conjure up different memories of my life.
So when you think about it, what comes up for you as far as either blind following or blind?
So this is something our audience, I think, it would be really, really fun for you to do. Ask yourself, has there ever been a time where I followed somebody or I followed something or I trusted in something. And it turned out that I actually didn't really think about it that much. And I didn't really put a lot of effort into investigating it first before I did it. And
But
I
you thought
did
you
it.
did.
But yeah, you may have thought that you did and everything, but it turns out that you really should have,
Oh,
in
all right. Well,
hindsight.
put your examples in the chat because now Amy's talking, so I'm reading the chat here, catching up here.
There's some very funny things in the chat. Thank you so much, guys.
You guys are the best. You really are.
Guys are just awesome.
We just have the best chat comments on our shows. I
So,
love this.
okay. So, I mean, the easiest,
I missed some of this. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
laugh at will here.
Is this
But,
MSG organic?
Anyway, so the obvious one is sharing info or memes on social media before checking to see if Abraham Lincoln really did say that.
Oh, yeah, we've run into
that's
that.
a good blindly following example, or or whatever it is. I mean, and you see this in a lot of, sometimes you see it in objectivism. Sometimes, more often you see it, with conservatives and liberals, and and they do all this kind of like confirmation bias thing, where they're, and that basically means, only paying attention to information that confirms your current beliefs. So they kind of just cherry pick facts and they ignore the rest because it doesn't conform to what makes, whatever makes them feel that they're right. And so they don't actually look at the other side. They don't actually venture into that. Or put themselves in the shoe of another person, or however, they just pay attention to what they want to pay attention to. But okay, so that's the obvious one. And I've done this maybe a couple times on like Facebook or however, and I've, great one is The Onion or Babylon Bee. And
Oh my gosh.
People
did you read this news story and they don't even notice it was a parody?
There's one of our lovely friends. I won't say the person's name, but this person actually sent a group email to a whole bunch of people, because this person believed that Obama was arrested because they found out that he was actually born in Kenya, according to his real birth certificate. So
you laugh, but I know people who still believe that story.
Anyway, and it was just such a depressing ordeal having to let this person know that they were actually incorrect. Oh, Lasai. So,
dear Schmo, your link to this onion at babylonbee.com. You may want to know that Babylon Bee is a parody site. Yes. You might want to know that.
Another example is, and this is something that I've done, and all these things I've done. And I mean, you wouldn't be a thinking human being without having to occasionally fall into these things and being duped. But, thinking that politician X is going to solve all the world's problems if only you vote for them, which is like, oh my gosh.
Come on, boys gotta have hope. You got to believe in something.
Not in this political context. That's just not going to work. Very, very rarely does it work. So anyway, it's just not, if you think that perhaps, this politician is going to solve all of your problems and perhaps your relationship to the government and perhaps provide you more freedom, it's probably, you may want to rethink that. Not fall for the confirmation bias. So I worked with the GOP, the Michigan GOP, for that's the Republican Party, the grand old party.
Okay. You worked for the GOP. How many years were you part of the GOP?
5 years.
You were a member of the GOP for 5 years.
5 years. Yeah, about 10 years ago.
Now, when I say member, I don't mean that she sent them money. I mean, she actually worked within the GOP for 5 years.
I was a delegate and a state committee woman. And I would go to, all the conferences or the conventions and, Mackinac Island. And I met a whole bunch of politicians, and the main thing that I focused on when I talked to anybody was the issue of individual rights and trying to give them a different view of it, a more philosophically grounded view of individual rights. I think I did a little bit of good, but and I should say this, that for me, that wasn't so much blindly following. I knew what I was getting into, at least some of it. But it was more of a risk than following blindly, I think. So it's a bit of a borderline case, but I really spent a lot of money because you have to, as a state committee woman or a delegate, you've got to spend money on hotel rooms, on food, on
Oh
travel
yeah,
costs.
they don't pay for anything.
They don't pay you for anything. It's all volunteer work. And so
It's like you were elected. Shouldn't there be money for you to serve your role?
no.
No, we need you to travel to Mackinac. And you've got to put yourself up.
Yeah. I get the privilege, the honor and the privilege of meeting politicians. Whoop-de-doo.
And the worst thing is the ones you meet, believe me, all of their stuff was paid for by their campaign funds.
Yes, exactly. But it was very eye-opening. I'm glad that I went through the experience, but it was
Yeah, did you ever feel like you were sanctioning the nonsense that you saw?
Yeah, I did. Although I should say this, anytime I went to a convention, I would bring my like a big giant, it's like, it's the Atlas Shrugged. Yeah, that one there. I would bring the big giant heavy Atlas Shrugged with me. I would hold it and cradle it in my arms like it was my baby.
Who gave you the best reaction when you were carrying around a copy of Atlas Shrugged?
So I was at a convention and this older gentleman, I don't know who he was, but he must have been like 120 years old. And he looked right at me and gave me like super stink eye. And then I looked at him back and I'm like, stink eye back at you, mister. So anyway, that was basically it.
Who was your favorite politician though? Who gave you the best reaction?
Oh, yes. Thank you. The best reaction is in terms of good reaction. That must have been Justin Amash, who is currently with the Libertarian Party, but he was a Michigan congressman, I believe, for a number of years. And Justin Amash. So what happened was I met him. I handed him my my delegate card that I made myself, and on it said, founder of Great Lakes Objectivists. And
he knew what that meant.
He knew what it meant. I knew he knew what it meant. And he just flipped out and he went all girl on me. And he was like, oh my gosh, really? You're an objectivist? Oh my
goodness. Ooh, cool.
Yes. No, stop your swooning, Justin Amash. I'm just an objectivist. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, incidentally, since you were talking about groupthink, I have to say that Chandler is advocating groupthink. He has contributed $5 to say all the cool kids are super chatting Robert and Amy Rock. That's right. It's the cool thing to do.
Thank you, Chandler.
Throw money, super chat. We'll answer any question.
Pressure your peers.
That you super chat at us to support the Ayn Rand Center UK. But that is cool, Chandler. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, I have a lot of stories about the GOP and it's very interesting. Getting back to what I felt where I was.
You were the blind follower.
I was the blind follower.
Okay. What else we got?
So I was a little younger. This was back in the 90s. And
you must have been a little girl.
Yeah, I must have been 12. I was 12. So, so I joined a protest. I won't mention any names who put it together, anything like that, out of kindness and courtesy. But it was pretty good. It was basically we were protesting Bill Clinton's newest horrible idea, which was the National Service Program.
Oh my gosh.
And mandatory volunteerism.
Does anybody remember mandatory volunteerism?
It's still in the schools. It's basically been it's pretty mainstream at this point. You need to put
smuggled it in by making it not mandatory.
Yeah.
But if it's in the schools and you get credit for it, it's essentially mandatory, right, or you don't get the credit.
Yeah. And then you don't graduate or whatever. And so anyway, we were protesting that. And so at one point, some person had this very interesting idea to protest against altruism. Okay, get this, put your context hats on, people. And we were going to go protest right outside the Ronald McDonald House.
Oh.
And I had thought to myself, Amy, what the heck are we doing, huh? Why are we going to the Ronald McDonald House to protest outside? It's a charity. It's a private charity.
That's right.
And thankfully, before we got there, somebody, a light bulb went up. Somebody had an epiphany and thought, this is not the best way to protest altruism outside the Ronald McDonald House.
No, those of us who think that the state shouldn't be involved in redistribution and charity, we're all in favor of private charity. That's how it should get done.
But at the time, I felt like I was following blindly because I didn't speak up. And sometimes, you know what, when you're in those sorts of tricky situations, you know, you have to think to yourself, you know, if I had a little bit more time, if I wasn't kind of following the crowd as, you know, literally, then maybe I would have spoken up right away. But anyway, I'm very grateful that somebody did, because that would not have been the best.
It's tough because in a way you think, well, how do I fight altruism though?
Yeah.
If I'm not going to go where the altruists are.
Yes.
And I understand. So these are great examples of when you feel like you should have been a little less blind. What about times when you think you rebelled blindly?
Well, yeah. I mean, that actually, strangely enough, even though I was a Nietzschean existentialist punk rocker as a teenager.
Which should have meant all sorts of rebellion.
Yeah. I stayed in school. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. Because I knew that was.
But you were a hardcore
good.
punk rocker.
But as a hardcore punk
Can you tell me
rocker,
on Valentine's Day, you once gave out condoms on Valentine's Day?
So there's a wonderful band called Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and they sang a really lovely tune called "Love Comes in Spurts."
Yeah.
It's a very beautiful ballad.
And that it does.
And so what I did was I bought some condoms and I, you know, cut out some hearts and I put "Love Comes in Spurts" and I stuck the little hearts, you know, with tape on the condom packages, and I handed it out to my fellow students.
For Valentine's Day. In your high school.
In my high school.
Charming.
I did a lot of other things. Like, I mean, this is the thing though, at that time, and even now, I don't think it was blind rebellion. I think it was just.
No, that one sounds just good, clean fun.
Yeah, it was great, clean. Now, I did actually do something very risky, which was, and now I wouldn't have done this. Put your context hats on, people. Hear this one out. So in our high school, they decided in my senior year to implement a dress code.
Dress code.
And I'm like, this is a public school. I wear what I want. And I did. And there were times when I would, so of course, you know, I would come to school dressed up like, you know, looking like, you know, a Satanist or something like that. But actually it was more artistic than it was scary. But I would make my own wire jewelry and do all sorts of cool stuff with my hair. And I still do, as you can see. But so I took a red shirt, like a red men's shirt, and I put in acrylic black paint, "Support the LPHS dress code" on it, and big black letters, Lincoln Park High School, LPHS. And on the side of my sleeve, I put an ever so lovely swastika on my sleeve. Now, this was the late 80s, and it wasn't so woke back then. But
that's rebellion.
I wore that shirt probably a good 3 times. Not one teacher said anything.
They're probably afraid of you. I'm afraid to
Some
say
of them
anything.
some of them sure. But honestly, a lot of the teachers, they knew me, and they knew that I was just a sweet, intelligent, clever girl who thought very deeply upon things.
Yes.
And they saw that. And anyway, I guess that's an example of rebelling. But yeah, for me, it was more like one time I lost my cool when I was at a town hall meeting against government-run healthcare. And there was this lady in line, and we're trying to get in. And by the way, this was Dingle, Representative Dingle.
Debbie Dingle.
No, her husband before he croaked.
Oh, okay.
And
Well, the whole Dingle family are just live
awful.
on politics.
Just terrible. So anyway, this lady kind of got under my skin. And so I just started screaming at her.
As justice would demand.
I never do that. I never like lose my cool or anything like that. But I felt bad that I screamed at her, because I thought that, you know, later on, like, Amy, that was not dignified. So
it's
yeah.
complicated. It's complicated. And,
very
you know,
complicated.
again, you don't want to appear to sanction things
Yeah.
by following
Mhm.
But sometimes what you're being told is actually what you want to do. And it would be foolish to say, oh, I wanted to become a concert pianist, but the state said I have to be a concert pianist, and therefore I'm going to be a street sweeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Scott advises us, do whatever the State Science Institute says. And,
Well-
because Robert Stadler tells us, what can you do when you have to deal with people? I always listen to Dr.
Terrible.
Robert Stadler. He's one of my favorite philosophers.
Yeah. Yeah. All those wonderful Ayn Rand quotes, like that one.
Like, I'm so sick of all of you impractical idealists. Always listen to Robert Stadler. He's the best. And
okay.
the benefactress,
Yes.
the impresario, is there a female version of that? Impresaria?
Impresarius?
The impresarius and benefactress of the Ayn Rand Center UK, Maria Lean, didn't ask any questions. She just chimed in with $2 on the super
Yay,
chat. Thank you for that.
Marilyn. Thank
And
you so
Sam
much.
is back saying, I find myself often disinterested in discussing politics. I focused on art, where I think I make greater impact and feel joy. To what extent should we be involved in political discussions / activity? It's a great question.
Great question. Thank you so very much.
And
£10.
it goes
Awesome.
to sort of my answer. If I was going to try to wrap this conversation up, would love to hear more examples, incidentally, of this kind of conflict for you folks. But Sam is giving us a perfect example of what we run into. And my answer is, going back to my episodes on curating your life and the discussion we're going to have next week on recipes and scripting, is you are living a life. And because of your nature, and fundamentally the fact of free will, you are writing, you're scripting a life, you're scripting this life. The neat thing is you get to design your life. You get to script your life. You are not only the star of this, you are also the screenwriter and the director and the producer. The only challenge is if you are writing a script from scratch, you'd have to take account of, well, what can the studio afford in terms of special effects and sets and all that other stuff. And those would be your limitations as well, what's possible to do. Your limitation in writing your script for your own life is the world out there and everybody else, because everybody else, they're each writing their own script too. So with those limitations in mind, you still have a near infinite range of opportunities. You get to choose how much of your time and energy you're going to spend saving the world, fighting the culture war, fighting the things that you care about. It's a some but any. It's optional how much time, your energy you're going to spend focusing on your own personal values and living your life versus fighting. I shouldn't say versus, because every time I say, oh, you need a work-life balance, or you need a live your life, fight the culture war balance. Anytime you hear the word balance, try, if you can, and you always can, replace the word balance with integrate. Anytime somebody says, oh, you've got to balance out the heart and the mind. Oh, you've got to balance out your personal interests in the wider society. Oh, you've got to balance out caring for your children and spending time with your wife. Anytime somebody says the word balance, replace balance with integrate.
Yes,
It's
that's a great
almost
point.
always a false alternative. And yes, sometimes it's a bit of a balancing act, but if you can integrate your values, you will always achieve a better result than trying to balance them. So how much time should you spend fighting the political war, the culture war? Well, how much can you integrate that fight with the things you care most about? You know, there are people out there who care most about the fight. There are people out there like Jason Crawford is one of those fighters, and what he loves is the fight. There are people like Alex Epstein. He loves the fight, and it's what he's good at, and it's what he wants to be doing. And he posts online about his personal life and his relationship and his one wheel and his hobbies. He even does a whole human flourishing podcast. But the fight is integrated. It's not an either or. It's not a balancing act. And that's what you want. If you love the political fight, spend some time. If you've seen my Facebook photos, you know we have spent time standing in the streets with protest signs. We spent time in front of the White House protesting. We have been all over the country protesting. But My rule has always been 97.3. This is the Robert Naser perspective. You should spend 97% of your time living your life pursuing positive values and 3% of your time fighting disvalues. For you, those numbers might be wholly different. I told Jason that number, 97.3, and he said, well, that doesn't work for me because this is what I do. So, well,
Yeah.
that's as it should be. If you're a policeman, if you're a fireman, if you're a politician of all things, your numbers might be 397 or 60/40 or something else. Point is, integrate. Write that script and make it align with your values. And if somebody says, oh, you're wearing a mask, you must be on the left, or you must believe your governor knows best, or you must be, all you need to do is what Ayn Rand said, which is speak and tell them, no, I actually am against, say, my governor's mandates or the president's latest speech on COVID. I'm only doing what I believe is in my rational self-interest. And I'm fighting the mandates, which incidentally we have fought.
Yep.
I'm fighting all of these other things. Don't ever assume based on this that I'm part of that. Speak out. Don't sanction. And if anything that you do for your own sake and in accordance with your own values gives the appearance of sanction, speak out. Say the words and be willing to take some risks in that regard, because some people won't react well to that.
I certainly took risks when in high school when I was a punk rocker, and I shaved my head on 3 sides and I spiked the rest up and I dyed my hair all sorts of crazy colors, and I took a lot of risks, and I also had to kind of contend with what other people may have thought of me. So be true to yourself. Be true to yourself. And sometimes, even if somebody does think badly of you for whatever reason, it's okay. It's all right. You know what? That's on them. They need to solve that problem. You don't need to justify yourself. You can, but if you think that person is worth talking to in that way, but yeah, be true to you.
And that's part of the bottom line, as Amy says, and as Ayn Rand says in those articles, which you've got to read if you haven't already, or reread. They're both worth a reread anytime. Both How Does One Live a Rational Life in an Irrational Society, and the later What Can One Do, is if it is an irrational society, and I don't think it's as irrational as most people think, but it is irrational. There is all sorts of irrationality out there, and some of it is downright menacing. Everything going on in the public schools is menacing. If it is an irrational society, then doing your own best, following your own best judgment, integrating your values with the fight against disvalues will not always give you an ideal result. I'm sorry, the world's a mess. Certain things are a mess, but it will always give you the best result you can get.
Yeah.
You do the best you can, you get the best possible result. I'm sorry. I apologize that doesn't mean you get the ideal result, that you get the ideal world, that all the irrationality in the world goes away. What you do want is the best result. You want to live the best life you can. Script it. Yeah. Choose it. Live intentionally.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of persuading other people, you got to think in terms of probabilities. Me going into the GOP for 5 years, I knew I wasn't going to change everybody's minds or influence everybody that I spoke to, but I did some. And I think the world's better for it, to whatever extent it is. So that's what you do. And sometimes you just need to be yourself, and other people will look at you, say that person obviously seems like they have things together. They look like they're relatively happy. I want to be more like that person. And, so there's ways to influence other people and get the ideas out there. But remember to be yourself and to think in terms of all of these ideas that Ayn Rand said and all these other ideas, from economists and all this stuff. Process it through your own first-handed thinking. And honestly, if you want to engage politicians and other people, then what you do is write to them and oh yeah, we had a phantom phone call there. Sorry. Write to your politicians in a way that you think might be good and just practice at that. Yeah.
All you can do is all you can do, and all you can do is enough. We have a couple more super chats before we
yeah.
wrap up. Samuel Yes comes on with another generous contribution and says, you are both musicians. Can we expect a video on the importance of music, or maybe even a virtual concert? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is no, not literally. But no, at some point we will play. We've had people request that we play music. We're not the world's best musicians, but we do have an awful lot of fun with it. So yes, we do need to do that. If anybody is coming to OCON, the Objectivist Conference sponsored by the Ayn Rand Institute, we will be there. We will be at OCON. Amy will be dancing. I won't give too many details. I'll be playing a little acoustic guitar along with that, nothing really to speak of. But Amy has suggested that, well, there's a couple of songs we'd like to cover, just rock songs, quirky rock songs.
Fun stuff.
We've missed the audition window for that, but we'll see. I suspect we might be able to convince them to take a last minute entry, since we're already going to be there for.
Or have an open jam.
Well, that would be there nice. Will be open jams at OCON. Yes. There's always the patio, acoustic guitars. True. Everybody's singing along to the songs everybody knows, usually old classic rock or anything top 40 in the last 20, 30, 50 years. Short answer is yes, that will happen. Long answer is I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but thank you for the interest. Thank you for the suggestion. Yes. Once it does happen, you'll say, oh, I didn't know they were that level of amateur musician. Maybe I shouldn't have asked. Be careful what you ask for. You may get it. And Kathleen Kosh contributes £2 and says, so insightful and such a helpful methods. Well, thank you. Thank you for the compliment. Very good, kind of you to say that.
I'm very happy that this is helping. This is good.
And again, Mary Aline, our eternal benefactress, is back again with $10 and says people who are happy and pursue their passions don't have time for power lust.
Yeah, that's true.
You have no duty to engage in politics. Happy people help build a better culture. Mm-hmm. Politics can be very second-handed and
yes,
all true, all undeniable. And I especially love the fact that the best thing you can do to save the world is live a good life.
Yes.
Not just providing a good example, but everything that you do and living your own best life has, what do they call them? Network effects. It has so many effects you won't even know what an impact that has. So absolutely right, Mary Aline, is focus on the positive, focus on the values, create, produce, and celebrate. And that gives so much fuel to your fellow fighters that it can't help but have a massive impact. At least that's proven true. I shouldn't say at least. That has proven true in my life. Mm-hmm. Logically, rationally, it has to prove true.
Yes.
We said before, Ayn Rand has observed, you don't create a building by refraining from destroying it. You don't create values just by not destroying values. And you don't create values just by fighting.
Right.
Value creation is primary. We need defenders. We need intellectual defenders. We need policemen. We need firemen. We need military. We need fighters. But we need something to be fighting for. And that's why Mary Aline's absolutely right. Values are primary.
Yes.
Live your life. So my best answer to the question of how do I balance the I don't want to be a blind follower, but I don't want to be a blind rebeller either. And I don't want to appear to sanction that which I should be fighting, even if my actions, my own best rational understanding means doing the thing. And the answer is script your life. Decide how much time you're going to spend saving the world versus living your life. And again, speak out. Just say the words. It's all you've got to do to not sanction. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate all the support for the Ayn Rand Center UK. Again, you can go to their membership page at aynrandcenter.co.uk and support them. If you want to support our work, go to robertnacer.com and you will find links not just to our Sunday show, but we do have a Patreon and a PayPal link. So if you want to be part of that, you can do that as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I think this was a valuable discussion. It was certainly a fun discussion. I appreciate the chat, always the best part of the show. What we're going to do is we're going to go over to Clubhouse and we're going to keep talking because I haven't lost my voice yet. We got more to say.
Yeah.
So join us on Clubhouse. We're going to wrap up now. Thank you for joining us and we will see you, we will hear you in a moment.